Promises. Basically going over promises. So I'll bounce back and forth between when we first learned promises and the project we did today that tie together promises within HTML page and APIs.
Mm-hmm.
Documentation.
Yes. So first and foremost, I'm just going to break down what's going on here, one step at a time. So first and foremost, promises are something so far we have been using to, here it's to access data, in here it is to iterate over something so we can input new values into it, basically create like a flexible function almost that we can call to multiple times without having to go into callback hell. This was a little confusing to me, so we can dive into this after we understand how it works with an API. So with API, what we're doing, in literal terms, we're saying, hey computer, fetch or go get this information at this address. So it's going to go here, it's going to pull up this information, this whole huge, all of this info. So say, okay, once it has it, is our dot then. Dot then is a built-in function with promises that says, when this loads, run this. We're now calling all of this information response. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then we're saying return response.json. That's just going to reformat it so it's in a JSON file. We're saying, okay, then all this that is now .json is now going to be called Polkadata. So we took this information, we fetched this, we turned it into a JSON. Now all of that up to this point is now called Polkadata.
Gotcha.
So it's this information in the JSON format is Polkadata.
And then what you're doing here is what you're doing to the Polkadata.
Yes.
Yeah.
So dot then is just saying after this runs, do this. So when we're fetching, we're saying, hey, fetch this. Once you have it, run this.
Oh, so it's
Once
it's
this
like,
runs,
it
runs this.
like contingent on
The previous information operates. This is all actually in the same function. So if you see, we start the dot then response here. We do this to the information. Then we start another dot then, taking that information, and start another function. And then we close all the functions out. Okay. So I'm going to basically break down what's going on in all of this. So first we're going to create a function so we can call our promise. The function is to be called waitUntil because we want to create a function that we can give the parameters of a time and a value. Oh, oops. A time and a value to say, hey, wait until this time to do whatever with this value, right? We're going to call it the variable promise, just to make it easier to refer to. Return promise, correct. So, capital P promise is the built-in JavaScript function of a promise that has a bunch of built-in functions inside of it to make life easier for us, so we don't have to go to callback hell. The biggest difference between using promises and using callbacks is callbacks work in themselves. So if I was going to create a function that took callback, and we wanted to call something else, we would do a function that worked on that callback, did something else, and you can see it would continue in this manner, and that took that callback, something else this, and you see how it's accordion-esque, similar to like HTML, where it keeps getting deeper in itself.
Yeah.
The difference between callback hell and promises is, see how promises are cascading, so it's a lot easier to read and see the flow of things. So that's the biggest difference so far that I've seen. So we're creating a function in our promise, right? So we call the promise function, which is like that, and we have to give it a function inside of it. This is a generic function. We're going to, every promise function has a resolve and a reject statement. We're only going to be dealing with resolve for right now. Reject will be later. So later when we call it down here, this function val is calling this function the first section being resolve, first section we're just calling val. We can call this resolve because it's pulling this information right here. Does that make sense?
It's pulling this information that you're storing here, right here.
Yes.
But you had it as val, right?
Yeah, and
so
that's just,
does it need to be the
that's just
same?
value.
Yeah.
Because it automatically knows what this information is when you call the dot then function, which we'll get to. So anyways, you're always going to write your promises like this. Promise, function, resolve, reject, and then your code. This promise function is a set timeout function, which is another built-in function within JavaScript. It's cool, there's a lot of those. This little code right here is the same as if we wrote function and then our brackets. It's the exact same thing, just to do this is our placeholder, and then this is just saying it's a function, run this with the placeholder. So here we're saying resolve value.
So let me ask.
That's where it ties in. So then here is where we're going to run these values in. Time and value, resolve the value, and input the time here. The set timeout function is going to, after this time in milliseconds, do whatever's inside of it. So when we call wait until 1,000 the man, what we're saying is, okay, wait until, we're going
Calling
to
that
put
function
time
wait
in
until.
here, 1,000, and the value is the man. So it's going to open this up, and it's going to put in the value being the man, and the time being 1,000 milliseconds. Right?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Dot then, once all that is done, once you have put those values in place and all that's ready to go, dot then, that's a built-in function of the promise. Dot then, run this little line of code, run this function. So we're taking the argument val, which is the argument resolve, which resolve is value. The value. Basically return the value. Whatever resolve stands for in this function will always be put in here. This variable will always equal resolve. So here we're saying, okay, cool. I want you to console log the value, or the resolve, which the resolve is the value that we inputted right here. So after you do that, which is when we print the man, right? If we run it, you see that after a second, the console prints the man. Then we say, okay, now return wait until 500. So we're going to say, okay, now that we've run this snippet of code, we're going to do it again. So we have to say return now. So return the value up to here. We're going to return wait until 500 the myth. So we're resetting time and value. Running the same thing again. Dot then, so after those are set in place, run this section of code. And we're returning this one more time. So after half a second, everything will go. So after that, once these two are in place, once the time is plugged in and the value is plugged in, run this next set of function. This next set of function will just print out the resolve value. And then we'll say, okay, now wait another second, run this again, this time wait a second, and then print legend, right? So it's going to put the time for 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds. The value is going to become legend. When we call this function, we're going to say then function resolve. This is the resolve value. Console log the resolve value.
Which would be
Resolve.
this one here. Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Legend.
which would be legend because legend became value. Our resolve equals our value. So when we run it, you'll see after a second the man pops up, half a second the myth, half a second the, a full second after the legend. And we could have done the same thing using callbacks, but it would have taken a callback and a callback and a callback and a callback, and it wouldn't have looked this clean. And that's the biggest, at least in this scenario, the biggest advantage to using a promise is the cleanliness of being able to read it.